Today we're going to begin Chapter 10, Section 1, Cell Growth and Division. So we're going to talk about that third part of the cell theory, the part where do new cells come from. So we're going to continue with our analogy that we used in the last chapter. We're going to continue comparing our cell to a city. So we're going to compare a growing cell to a growing city. Now, when we do this, what we want to think about is we want to think about the library that's in our town. Now, our library only has a certain number of books. As that city grows, these books are in greater and greater demand, which limits access to those books. A growing cell makes a greater demand on the genetic library, which in this case would be our DNA. If the cell gets too big, the DNA would not be able to serve the cell and meet all of its needs. This pretty much means that it becomes overloaded. A living cell needs to store that critical information in the form of DNA. As the cell grows, that information is used to run the cell. It's used to build molecules needed for cell growth. As the size increases, the demands on that information grow as well. If the cell were to grow and no limits were put on it, then it would have an information crisis. It would be unable to meet the needs because it would be so large that the information just wouldn't get to the parts of the cell that we need it to. Exchanging materials. So when we talk about our cell, we have food, oxygen, water, and waste that have to enter and leave the cell through that cell membrane. Remember, that was our barrier that controls what goes in and out of the cell. Now, the rate at which this occurs depends on the surface area of the cell. The rate at which the food and oxygen are used up depends on how big it is, its volume, the volume of the cell. Now, the ratio between the surface area, what is outside, the surface area is the outside of the cell, what is exposed on the outside, to the volume is key in understanding why cells must divide. Remember, one of the first things we talked about in our cell chapter was that small cells simply work better and they work more efficiently. And this is what we're talking about. And why they work better all comes back to this ratio of surface area to volume. As the cell increases, its volume increases faster than its surface area, decreasing the ratio of the surface area to volume. If a cell gets too big, the surface area is not large enough to get the nutrients in and out that we need. So while it is bigger in volume, the actual surface area that is in contact with the outside to be able to move things around is smaller. So when you look, you can see that the nucleus is there, and the nucleus remains the same size. But as your cell gets bigger, it becomes harder and harder for that nucleus to get stuff out because the volume has become too great. So, what happens before a cell grows too large is it divides into two new daughter cells in a process we refer to as cell division. Before cell division actually occurs, the cell copies all of its DNA because remember, all cells have to contain DNA. It then divides. After it has copied its DNA, it divides in those two daughter cells. The daughter cells have a complete set of DNA in each of them, and they are identical. What cell division does is it reduces the cell volume, but it also increases the ratio of the surface area to volume for each new daughter cell.